Michael Abels is the composer for the HBO film Bad Education. I'm at Nobler Gold Derby to ask you, Michael, what was the most challenging scene for you to score?
Oh, hey, Matt. It's
Hey,
great to see you.
good to see you too.
Most challenging was the most challenging scene. There's a couple of them. One was there's a love scene, and I don't want to give away any spoilers about it, but there's a lot of emotion hidden underneath in this scene, and getting the temperature of that of you know emotional joy and vulnerability, and yet kind of just fear, and there's a sense of the forbidden, and finding the right combination of all those emotions in the music was a challenge I took a couple passes at before Corey Finley, the director, was exactly happy with how that happened. And I ended up putting a couple different versions of that cue on the soundtrack album, actually, so people could hear kind of the slight differences. So that scene was one challenge. But then there's a much longer sequence in the end called The Downfall, which is where each character ultimately gets their comeuppance. And that had to go through, it's a 2 to 3 minute cue, and it goes through different iterations as it shows, or different stages as it shows what happens to each character, and it all has to fit together while telling this emotional journey. And so I worked on that one a lot as well.
Mm. What role do you see music playing in the film?
So music is an important storytelling aspect of the film. In some ways it's another character, but it's really doing two things. One is that the story is based on a true story of a very large school embezzlement scandal that took place in about 2003, I think on Long Island in New York. And which doesn't sound like your first choice of a story for a film, maybe, but it's in watching the way the story unravels is what makes the film so amazing. And the music helps. So classical music, which is mostly the score, is designed to be legitimately classical and to sound like it might be source music, even though it's actually not and scored to picture. It's because Frank Tassone, the main character played by Hugh Jackman, that's the kind of music that he naturally listened to. So in one way, it's helping portray his character, but in another way, because this school is even though it's a public school, it's a very high pressure, got to get into an Ivy League college type school. The sort of hallowed halls of a really esteemed academia, that's the sort of thing that classical music is really great at illustrating. So the score causes us to be thinking in that sort of upper crust academic mode already. And then, but then there's also some minimalist music in the score, and that represents the investigation, where the student journalists are beginning to check things out and understand that things are not what they appear. And the minimalist music represents that onion slowly being peeled to reveal the inner core.
Mm. The thing I liked about it was that it's a it's a local bureaucratic sort of corruption, sort of student newspaper, but the sort of very orchestral classical score gives it this sort of grand sort ofness to what's happening. When you were watching the film after it all came together, what was a particular moment that you were particularly proud of, or that just worked so well when you finally saw all the images and everything just come together and play in the context of the film?
Wow. So I really like, I like a cue that's near the end of the film where it's it's called, what is it? It's called Unraveling Air is what the cue is called. And it starts with actually the theme from the love theme, but taken to just a even more tragic extreme. And it's a scene where where Frank Tassone is the scandal has broke, and the parents are in the auditorium and they're angry, and he's trying to keep a lid on things, and he's finally no longer in control, and then it cuts to a scene of the feds finally coming to investigate, as Frank predicted they never would, but they finally are there. And it's the cue where both the classical music and the minimalist music come together, and it is in a harmonic language that's very, very tragically sad and kind of a grand scale tragedy, but it's also got these minimalist elements to it. And so it's a cue that's kind of unique both in the film and in the music I've written. And to see how well it works in the film, it just really made me happy. And I loved this film from the moment that I saw it in the rough cut, and to be able to help tell this story and make it everything that I think that it can be was just such a joy.
What was your experience in working on this film?
I think the connection was, I think Sue Jacobs, the music supervisor, is the one who thought that I might be a good fit for the project. And I first screened the rough cut in her office, and I just thought already that it was darkly funny in a way that I didn't expect. And that once I understood what the film was about, I was just drawn into it. Corey Finley always knew that he wanted classical music. And he has this way of where he's not ashamed or afraid to just play a scene dry. But then when there is music, the music really tells the story and is an active player. And there are a lot of sequences in Bad Education where there isn't much dialogue, but it's just visuals and music telling the story. So I felt like I was like, yeah, I really want to do this. And he's also very astute about music, but he also approaches it as if he doesn't assume he knows as much as he does, I think, which is something I really appreciate in a person, because it helps them give. His feedback was always very precise about the emotional feedback he gave me. Made a lot of sense. It really informed what I was doing. And it was also very encouraging, even when he wanted me to change things pretty radically. So the short answer to your question is I had a great time.
Oh, that's good. And was it a pretty collaborative process?
Yeah, I mean, it's the type of score where the composer has to go away and do a lot of work, because there's a lot of orchestration, and to make something sound Baroque, there's a lot of weaving of little parts you have to do. So I would do that part, but in terms of him guiding what emotionally the music was supposed to say in a scene and what its goal was, absolutely very collaborative. And he came and hung out at my studio with me, and while we worked on especially some of the minimalist music, where it was just like one sound. If a particular sound, you have to like that sound, or if you don't, the whole cue doesn't work. You have to change it to be just right. So we worked on stuff like that really closely.
You've also done work on the films Get Out and Us for Jordan Peele. What was similar or different, similar and different about doing the score for Bad Education?
Well, what's similar is actually both Corey and Jordan have, they give really good feedback, and they do it in a way that that inspires you to do your best work, because they let you know through their choice of words that they have confidence in what you're doing, but they also know what they want, and they also have a way of expressing themselves in a way that's maybe not. I find the best notes aren't said in musical terms, but are said just in feelings, and because that gives me. When you understand what someone's feeling as a musician, you have a lot of ways of expressing that, but you're still going for the thing that the person is asking you to do. So that part's similar. What's different is that, Jordan deliberately wants to haunt people's nightmares and screw them up. He delights in doing that. And he also delights in taking things that you wouldn't think of as scary and kind of ruining them for you forever. So a lot of what a lot of what I enjoy doing with Jordan is kind of a form of psychological torture of the audience, figuring out how to really make people jump right out of their chair. And as you can tell, I have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
But I get to write a kind of music that I would never. Like if you listen to my concert music, there are not many moments that sound like they belong in a Jordan Peele film. You know, it's his encouragement has pulled me in a direction that I maybe have been afraid to go myself. So that's been beautiful. With Corey, what's different is that this was a dark comedy, and even though, you know, Jordan Peele films certainly are darkly comedic, Bad Education's much more. It's a real life story that takes place, kind of a tragedy that takes place on a really small stage. We think of schools as being kind of, you know, smaller time than they actually are to make them run well. So a lot of times the music there was about, you know, I know there's things where, like, you know, in a Peele film, there'll be moments of silence that are part of the score. You know, the tension in suspense is really everything. And so we spend a lot of time working on that. But in Bad Education, which is, again, this dark comedy and a drama, there's the tension and anticipation elements are not nearly as important as just the telling the story and allowing the audience to kind of interpret what they think about the characters' intentions.
I love that, like, sort of Jordan Peele helped you conquer some of your fears about the type of music you would do while giving everyone else many more fears.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I hadn't even actually thought about that until I just said it to you. Like maybe Jordan was helping me therapeutically, you know, in my music. So interesting.
Yeah. Did you get any nightmares from those two films?
You know, I didn't, but I certainly look at, you know, like with Us, I specifically asked Jordan, I said, you know, because I start by reading the script before the film is ever shot or anything. And I said to him, and I said to him, what's with the rabbits? And I was kind of expecting this, you know, profound literary answer. And he just said, they scare me. and so armed with only that, you know, when I see them in the film, and then now I don't know, you know, I used to think rabbits were fuzzy and cuddly, and now I'm not so sure. So I have him to thank for that.
That's good. I was reading today you started composing music from a very, very young age, from what I understand. At what point did you realize that you wanted to be using your music to help tell stories on film and television?
I think I finally finished a piece of music when I was about 14. I had tried to write before, and I would get, you know, it's not your first idea, it's what comes after that. That's the challenge. And as a child, I didn't really have the, you know, the developmental skill to see that through. So it took me till kind of beginning of high school. But I've always looked at music as storytelling, you know, just by the fact I say you start and then what comes next. You know, we're talking about the exposition of a story versus the plot of the story, or the plot or the development. And and one of my earliest musical impressions was The Sound of Music, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Do, Re, Mi, and one word for every note by mixing them up. You know, I don't think it ever didn't occur to me to not tell stories with music. It was just a question of what different, you know, media, whether that was the concert hall or film or streaming or whatever.
It's interesting. And would you say Sound of Music was sort of the most influential film for you in terms of scoring and stuff, or would you say another one was?
Well, as a kid,
As a kid,
kids go through obsessive stages where they, you know, all about, you know, I had a Sound of Music phase that was like someone else's Transformers phase or whatever.
Yeah.
Just,
Good.
But throughout my life, you know, different films with amazing scores have, you know, really just caused me to really respect and admire the people who can both tell a musical story and manage to make it match picture as if that was just easy, you know.
Yeah. What's a lesson you learnt through scoring Bad Education?
Wow. It's a lesson I learned. I didn't know that I could put minimalist music and kind of classical music together before. So I learned about that by having to do it. I learned about there's one cue called Rachel Ruminates, which is deliberately romantic and a kind of old romantic. And by romantic, I mean romantic in the actual period of musical and artistic thought from the middle, late 1800s.
Right.
I had never really written in that style, but this film was an opportunity to write in that style. And also there's a Baroque piece as well. It's very, you know, at least when it started out, it was very legitimately Baroque. So I got to learn about how to really, and there's kind of a harmonic language, which I'd explain, just like there are dialects in languages, and even though they're all the same language, the way the words are put together is very different. And that's kind of like, to me, that's like musical genre. Each one has its own language of things that you would do if you were going to speak in that language. So I got to try on these different musical languages and really adopt. You know, there's nothing like demonstrating that you understand a language if you can speak it, right? And so I was trying to speak each of these languages, and that was something I got out of this.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for talking with us today about Bad Education and the music of that film. All the best of luck with the Emmy Awards. And for people watching this video, you can go to goldderby.com and make your own Emmy Awards predictions and watch other interviews with top award contenders. Thank you so much, Michael.
Matt, thank you. It was a pleasure.